Good morning. Welcome to our webinar, MySQL, presented by Dale Dasker of Oracle and XTIVIA. We're glad you're with us this morning, and we're excited to give you some tips and hints on backup recovery, security best practices, and a little bit about JSON. XTIVIA has been around for about 25 years, and we love to help clients with IT solutions, whether it's building software, integrating applications, or just delivering project assistance. Our virtual DBA services specialize in remote database support, professional services, database health checks, monitoring, consulting, and we also offer licensing. Today, you're going to hear a little bit about our MySQL. We also offer other solutions like Digital Experience Platform, CMS, web portals, CRM customization and integration, BI, data warehousing, and mobile app and application development. Some of our customers range from A to Z, and we're happy that we could involve them in a positive solution for their business. Today we're going to hear from Dale. He is a principal sales consultant with Oracle MySQL team. Dale brings a strong background in MySQL and operating systems, and he brings that to prospective and current customers. He works closely with MySQL in the community through architectural discussions and product planning, and he's an advocate for needs within the MySQL community. Welcome, Dale, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. So, welcome. If you've dealt with Oracle before, you've probably seen our safe harbor. This just basically, if we're going to discuss any products that haven't been released yet, some of the functionality may change before it's released. So use the following presentation for informational purposes and not for making decisions for release. If there's anything of value or of interest to you, definitely reach out to the XTIVIA team or to us directly, and we're happy to dive deeper into any of those. So this is the agenda I'm going to cover. We have a lot of information to cover in a short time, so I just want to make sure that you know that this is just a high-level introduction to MySQL JSON. It's also a little high-level on the backup best practices. So any of these items, if you want further depth, the XTIVIA team or I could dive deeper into any of these for you at future times. I also want to let you know that everybody should be muted. So there's a question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you have any questions, post them in there. Lisa Smith is going to be helping me with questions, so she'll be answering any questions that you might have, or I will. And then we'll have hopefully time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions that we may not have addressed yet. Okay, so let's start with security best practices. There's been a considerable amount of news regarding data breaches over the past couple of years. The Ponemon Institute has been investigating these and has come up with a report which shows almost half of the companies that they've interviewed had a breach in 2015. They've also did a follow-up on the report, and year-to-date in 2016, the number of breaches are 20% higher than they were last year, year-to-date. So data breaches are becoming more and more of a common occurrence. When Ponemon investigated what the top threats were to these organizations, this is what they found. Some of it kind of made sense to me. So as you see, as I go out and visit a lot of our customers, our mutual customers, time is of essence to most of our customers. So they're churning out web apps as fast as they can. They're turning over new employees. They're growing. They're going fast. And a lot of times they just don't focus on security. So top three are typical things that I run into. Insecure web apps. People are just concerned about functionality, not about security when they usually release it. Negligent insiders is just people inside that don't really mean to cause problems, but they do by mistake. I've seen that a lot also. And then third-party flub. So I've seen a lot of I've seen this as well. A lot of our mutual partners are spinning up and pushing stuff out to the cloud providers, and they just don't have time to properly configure their environments. So they create a lot of security holes in their environment. So as DBAs, We can only help in the areas that we have responsibility for. So as we guard the company's data, we need to focus on controlling access. Who, when, and where. Next, we need to make sure that we know if there has been a breach. What's really interesting is Ponemon found that the longer it takes to discover a breach, the more expensive it is to the company. And in many cases, the average discovery period of a breach took around 50 days. So next, data is what we are controlling, so as a DBA. So we need to make sure that we protect that data by backing it up properly, and also encrypting it is a fantastic thing to the data as well to protect it. I'm going to go into each of these pieces. So let's look at what we can do with MySQL as a DBA to harden it. Like I said, we only have control over what we have. So I like to use real-life scenarios to illustrate the problems that we run into. I meet with many MySQL users, and they share with me how they often use only 1 or 2 accounts within MySQL. This is very common. When they do this, there's typically one root account that is shared with everyone on their team. This is a scenario that Alan is in right now. He has the root account information, and he gets fired for bad behavior. He's quickly removed from the corporate network, so he doesn't have access to the corporate network, but no one changes the MySQL root account access, so he gets upset about that. So what he does is Alan reaches out to a friend in accounting, and this friend is not very MySQL savvy. He tells a friend, he goes, "Oh, before leaving, I forgot to run a couple of commands to help the team out. Can you do me a huge favor and run these commands? I've been trying to get to my old manager, but he hasn't been available." So he tells his friend in accounting with the root password, run these SQL scripts, or run these scripts on the network. Drop database, blah, blah, blah. So that happens. We all know what happens. Databases are dropped that weren't supposed to be dropped. And so as a DBA, our responsibility is control unauthorized access to MySQL data. Let me get that mouse. We can change the root password every time someone leaves, or we can use MySQL Enterprise Authentication plugin. What this feature allows you to do is to create proxy users within MySQL, and then when users log into MySQL, they use their OS credentials and they get proxy to the appropriate MySQL user. So when Alan leaves, he never actually had the MySQL root password, and his friend in accounting will never have access with the proper authority to issue the commands that Alan wants them to do. Another cool thing about Enterprise Authentication is it logs the actual OS username and who they're proxied as. So it increases auditing. Usually we see when people log into MySQL, all it shows in the audit logs is who they log in as. So root at something, but that could be anybody on your network. So finding the actual OS credentials that the person uses to log into MySQL is huge. And with this, we're able to block one type of attack. And please, like I said, pop any questions into the panel if you have them as we're going, and we'll do as best we can to answer them. Okay, so using this example, Alan, he was still angry. He doesn't go away. He reaches out to one of his friends who's a hacker and has a botnet. So he talks his friend into hitting your website with a denial of service attack. So assuming that the networking team has protected you is not always the best assumption. So using MySQL thread pooling, it prevents any negative performance impacts from the denial of service attack. What we're showing here is a standard MySQL Community Edition is in the blue line, and Enterprise Edition with the thread pooling plugin is shown in the red line. So what happens is standard MySQL allocates a new thread for every connection, and the thread is an OS thread. And if things are not properly configured, like they often aren't, then a denial of service attack can severely degrade your MySQL performance. So what happens is more and more connections are hitting the server, the OS is becoming less and less efficient because you're constantly context switching between all the threads. So performance degrades. By enabling the thread pool plugin, you can sustain consistent performance regardless of any attacks. And what's really cool with a lot of these features is the thread pool is a plugin that can be loaded and enabled on the fly without any application awareness. So it's not up to the application developer to make sure everything's right. It's up to you as a DBA to make sure that MySQL is performing as it should. So Alan's now long gone, but we did find out that there were some attacks on us, so we hired Jack as an analyst. Jack's great. When his contract's up, he decides he's leaving. He decides he wants to take, maybe a couple pens with him, a stapler for his next job, but he also decides he's going to run a simple query to add some additional value to his next employer. So he takes your customer list as a parting gift. As I said earlier, our DBA responsibilities is we need to know who did what and when. So it's very important as a DBA. It's also very important with a lot of standards out there. So FIBS, HIPAA, PCI compliance, SOX, all these require some form of logging. And based upon the logging, it can determine what the penalties will be if you're in violation or if you're breached. So what people have been doing typically is using the general query log for many DBAs. But when a more enterprise-grade solution is required, then enterprise audit is enabled. So enterprise audit has been designed for flexibility to allow you to control who you're auditing, when you're auditing them, as well as where you want those audit logs to go. You can enable it live, so you can say, have just basic auditing turned on, and then if you see access coming in from a different server that you're interested in, you toggle and say log all those queries that occurred at that. It gives you the flexibility to push data out to Oracle Audit Vault or other auditing utilities. For instance, one of them is MySQL Workbench. So the output of enterprise audit, besides going to Oracle Audit Vault, can be parsed within MySQL Workbench. So with MySQL Workbench, we can easily find that Jack had taken data with him and possibly catch him before he leaves the premise and stop the data. So there's a great deal of integration between the different tools for visibility to what's going on inside MySQL. And that's been the basic goal of Oracle acquisition of MySQL, is to keep providing more and more visibility into what MySQL is doing. So we've done an excellent job of minimizing our attack surface from internal attacks. Now, how about bored young boys? They're just learning about the web, they had a summer off from school, and they've read up on SQL injections, and then they visit your company. David is he's a young, frustrated guy. He visits your company. He's been practicing SQL injection, and he decides to try it out in your company. So what he does is when he enters the following code that you see below, noah@email.com, drop database MySQL, and so forth, when he's entering his email address for a newsletter. And he smiles as he understands the true strength of the dark side of the web. Just in case you know, the pictures, these are all actors that I've been using. So this is David Prose, who is the original actor from the first 3 Star Wars. He played Darth Vader. So controlling access to the data from internal and external forces is our responsibility. Blocking SQL injection is just a huge part of it. MySQL provides an enterprise database firewall. This can be enabled on a per-user basis. So what's great about this is it does not require any input from the application developers. The DBA can enable it in production, and you can use the force of the firewall to block the evil forces of the dark side. It runs in multiple modes, so you can have it be where it's just recording and alerting you if certain queries are being executed that are outside of the whitelist that you created. Or you can have it, as it's running, alert you and also block queries that are outside the whitelist. So what you'd end up doing is you create a whitelist on a per user, per connection basis, and that is what Enterprise Firewall allows you to execute. It works hand in hand with audit logs, so it generates audit events and puts them in there if there's issues going on. As I said, it's up to the DBA to enable it, so you don't have to worry about any bad application code or the application developer. You can just create a whitelist and spin it out as you're spinning MySQL out into production. If I'm going fast, please let me know. If you have any questions, please enter them in the dialog box. So now we've been able to harden MySQL against computer attacks, so people trying to get onto your network. But how about against physical attacks? So David, he gets together with Jack, and they break in at night and they actually steal your hard drive. So either they steal your hard drive or you get somebody else that breaks into your network and they go after your data directory. So they're going in to get the data directly, not going through MySQL. So leaving it unencrypted on disk can make their job a lot easier. So how do you secure your data at all times? First step is to provide encryption on the data at rest. MySQL TDEs, or transparent data encryption, encrypts your data at the table space level. So it's transparent to the application users and can generate guarantee that if the actual NODB table space files are stolen, it cannot be accessed on other computers. So as a DBA, all you'll need to do is just turn on transparent data encryption on the tables that are of importance to your company. And then as the applications are reading and writing the data, it's stored on disk in an encrypted manner. And this is another very important piece of the puzzle. I see this often as overlooked, encrypting of backups. I've seen all sorts of security put in place with MySQL and Access, and then the data is backed up and it's just left in unencrypted format. This is not very good. So MySQL Enterprise Backup, besides many other features it does, it'll also encrypt your data as it writes it to disk. So it guarantees that the data stolen is not data loss. I see people use this where they are using multi-tenancy, and what they do is they use MySQL Enterprise Backup just on a database level, and then they get the keys, the encryption keys from their customers. As they're writing disk the backups, they encrypt it using their customers' encryption keys, and then they don't have the decryption keys, so they can never decrypt it. So the data is stored on their drives, and they guarantee that nobody internal to them has the key to decrypt the data if something's happening. So it's often internal users that are the ones that you got to protect against. It's one of my favorite pictures. So in many security reports I've read, understanding you've had a data breach is just about as important as understanding what data was breached. No one wants to find out that your systems have been compromised for months. The damage to your company's reputation may never be recovered. So we need to know immediately or as soon as possible when there are abnormalities. MySQL Enterprise Monitor is a perfect tool. So what it does first is analyze your MySQL instances for any known issues or security risks. It will even notify you if your instance of MySQL is not the proper minor release and where there are known bugs. So I've had people use that where they turn on MySQL Enterprise Monitor and they realize that they should be at the higher minor release level because there are known bugs, and those bugs are known out in the industry, and they could be a security bug. It is also integrated with MySQL Firewall, so it provides you instant notification of firewall alerts. This will allow you to quickly find out if someone is probing your system for vulnerabilities. Proactive notification is always much better than reactive. If we can see it coming, we can control it and make decisions better than if we're just fighting the fire right then and trying to put things out. We usually don't always make the best decisions at that point. So all these components together provide you with the ability to perform your responsibilities as a DBA. You can control and monitor who has access to your data, what type of access they have, when they have it, as well as securing your data at rest and making sure that anybody outside can't access the data, and even if they do, they can't do anything with it. Even with poorly written web applications and poorly configured servers, we can become the silent hero and protect our data against internal and external actors. Now these are the components of MySQL Enterprise Edition. What they do is they provide you with an enterprise-grade security blanket on top of MySQL. So if you can look at the core there, that's the core MySQL Community Edition that everybody's used to, tried and true. And then all of these wrap in as plugins or external tools on top of MySQL to harden MySQL and make it more of an enterprise-grade product. I'm going to move on to the backup section. So if anybody has any questions on what we've covered so far, I'll take a second to let you enter it into the dialogue if you're there. Okay. Nothing yet, so I'll keep going. So now that we've covered the hardening MySQL, let's look at one of the specific pieces of interest that most people have, backing up MySQL. So we briefly addressed this in the security portion of our presentation. So let's take a deeper look now at our key responsibilities of a DBA. One of the biggest ones is database recovery and backup, or backup and recovery. So what happens is, what we typically see is MySQL starts off, it's in your system, and it starts becoming a more and more important aspect of your business. And as that happens, the data keeps start growing faster and faster, and the application becomes to a point where you can't take it offline to back it up. So you need to manage what's going on with the continuous growth of the data, and also high access rates of it. So, and the key thing is when we need them, we need to get our backups recovered fast and confident the data is recovered. I talked to a customer before, and he told me that his manager said you can pretty much mess up anything, but if you can't recover the data, you're fired. And that was the key point of his whole job, was to be able to back up the data and recover it. When we are considering our backup strategy, there's two main requirements that we need to consider first. First off, we look at what is our tolerance for data loss. So in other words, how often does a backup have to be performed, and what granularity of the recovery do we need? This is what we call the recovery point objective. Secondly, we need to understand our recovery time objective. So this is, once something's happened to the server, how fast does it take to identify the problem and to recover it and to get the server back up and the system working properly? Then, of course, the last one is, what's our backup retention policy? How long do we need to store the data and keep it? So we look at the different backup methods. This is what I always see out in the field. So we have the first one as a full backup. This means you do a full backup of MySQL, and usually you can tolerate hours of your recovery point objective. So hours or days, because you're not doing a full backup every hour. Typically, I'll see something like this where they'll do a full backup at midnight or something like that every day, and then when you need to recover it, you just restore that full backup. That's the first level. Usually that's where people start off, but as the data starts becoming more valuable, we get to the point where we say, okay, we need to get all the changes in between there. So we need to reduce our RPO. We can tolerate less loss and perhaps no more than a few hours. So in this point, we do a full backup and then incrementals. So occasionally the full backup is done. Typically you'll do it off hours, late at night, early in the morning or something like that. You'll do a full backup. And then you'll do incrementals throughout the day to meet your RPO strategy, so your recovery point objective. To recover, what you do is you apply the full backup and you apply the incrementals to that. So sometimes the RTO might increase, so the time it takes to recover, because you're going from one point and pulling all those forward, but you're reducing the data loss up to that point. So that's just the trade-off with it. And I have a lot of customers that say they cannot lose any transactions. So this is where they do backup method, and they look at it and they say they need the full, an incremental, and the log. So what this does is, this is where you can only tolerate minutes of RPO, minutes of recovery point. Basically follow the same strategy as before. We do the full backup and incrementals, but we're also doing is backing up the transaction logs. So that's pretty straightforward as far as the backup strategy goes. To recover, what we do is we first apply the full, and then whatever incrementals we have, and we take the transaction logs and we roll forward. So typically people will use the MySQL client, and they'll just roll forward from that point to the exact point in time that they need. All the data is backed up to tape or to disk and archived as needed. Another very common backup method is offloading backups to slaves. So this is fantastic when you need just several minutes of if your recovery time, how quick you want to get back to running is very important. But the downside to it is you need additional hardware. So in this way, to set this up, the backloads to slaves, is you set up master slave replication, and then all the backups you run off of the slave. So you can run your full backups on the slave, you can run incremental backups on the slave, and then when you go to do a restore, you can either copy those backups to the master or run them back off of the slave, and the slave becomes a new master. Key point is that you need to still make sure you do backups. Okay, so now we've looked at some of the strategies for backups. Let's look at how we implement these strategies. The first tried and true and what everybody's used to is mysqldump. So this is a very popular tool It's probably the second most popular application that comes with standard MySQL installation. MySQL client is usually the first client app that everybody uses. And then, so what mysqldump is the advantage of it. It's a logical backup of your data. So what this means is it reads from the MySQL instance and then stores the data in readable text. It's great for small databases or tables because it's very easy to read the data. You can edit it. You can copy it. It's nice that it's transportable because you can take that data from the MySQL dump. You can run it on, I see people do a lot of where they'll do upgrades. So they'll do a dump of MySQL 5.5, then they'll load that data into MySQL 5.7. And they feel comfortable with that. They can copy the data across from Linux to Windows, Windows to Linux, or Mac, or whatever you need to. The downside is that the main ones I see is it's not incremental. So you're doing a full backup of the data every single time. The restore times are really slow. So as your data size increases, your restore time can just be tremendous. I have people that have told me that they start a restore on a Friday and it's still running by by Sunday night. So it spends their whole weekend trying to restore the data. And it's scary because you're offline while you're doing the restoring. So that's a disadvantage of it. A lot of advantages. A lot of people use it with other tools. MySQL Replication. So I hit on this before as a slave for backup. So this is commonly used, and it's very quick for recovery. So all you need to do is really use MySQL Replication. Your replica becomes a new master. Your recovery time is just, sub-seconds it could be if you just fail over real fast. The downside is that it's not a backup, it's a standby. So when you're using MySQL Replication. So it gives you the latest point in time, but that keeps moving. So if you need to get to a certain point in time, Replication doesn't provide you that. What you need to do is be using Replication in conjunction with another tool, and then run your backups off that and stop it. Also, what I've seen, which is kind of a scary feature, is it doesn't protect you from the oops. So I've seen code corrupted in the master, and then that corruption goes throughout the replication topology. What we added in MySQL Replication is we now have a feature where you can do time-delayed replication. So I'll usually see something like this where they'll have maybe a master and a replica, and that replica will just be for failover, but then they'll have a third replica, a second replica off of the master, so a third instance of MySQL, and that'll be running replication off of whichever is the current master, but then it'll have time delay. So it'll have maybe, could have a couple seconds or it could have an hour. That's enough time for you to get there and see what's going on and make sure that you can handle any oops that might be flowing through your replication topology. LVM Snapshots, I see this a lot also. So it's quick and typically very reliable. Biggest thing about that is that you need to make sure that you take care when you're using them. So for guaranteed reliability, we always recommend that you do flush tables with read locks before you do the snapshot. And when you're doing that flush table with read locks, if there's any long-running queries, this can slow things down. So that's kind of the disadvantage of it. Primarily works on Linux as well. So that's another advantage or disadvantage depending on your point of view. And of course, my favorite option is MySQL Enterprise Backup. So Enterprise Backup is a binary backup of MySQL. It's incredibly faster than MySQL dump is and much faster on the restores. It also provides incremental backups. So it gives you great options for your recovery time and recovery point objectives. The only disadvantage is that there's a lot of options to it. So it requires good planning and strategy to implement when and where the backups go. Any questions so far? Okay, so we have this chart. It helps you visualize comparison of the different backup options that we typically see. Of course, I always think Enterprise Backup is green and good on everything, but what it really is up to you to decide what's important to you. So, Enterprise Backup is a fantastic solution, but if you decide that, I'm only concerned with, full backup at certain times, I want portability, then you can look and say, MySQLDump does a fantastic job of what I need. So it's up to you to look at your backup strategies, your recovery time, your recovery points, and then use those to decide which strategy works best for you. Often I see kind of a blending of a lot of these. So what I usually see once people get to a certain point, they'll do replication and then run enterprise backup off of that replica. And that's what I've seen a lot of. But it's up to you to decide what's important for you. So just to dive a little bit deeper into enterprise backup, key differentiators between this and MySQLDump is it's a full online hot backup for InnoDB. You'll run backups of MyISAM, but they're in a read-only mode. Since it's binary, it's a lot faster in backup and restore than MySQLDump is. And it also provides you the ability to look at your strategy and then decide if you want to do full backups, incremental backups. Partial backups are where you're just backing up individual tables or databases. You can do point-in-time and recovery, and then it's also great because it's cross-platform, so you can run binary backups from Windows to Linux or back and forth and whatever you need. But what I see which really differentiates it from any other offering out in the market is it does validation. So none of the other backup utilities actually validate that the data that you backed up is correct. Enterprise backup will validate at the page level that each InnoDB page was properly written to disk. And this is huge because you could be running backups every day and feeling good, and then as it's writing to disk, something was going on and there's corruption, so all your backups are corrupted. You go to recover, and that's when you get really kind of have an eye-awakening moment. With enterprise backup, it won't do that. So it'll validate the data as it's being written to disk, and it'll let you know if there were secure backups or not. And the other key factor is it was written by the InnoDB engineers. So the same guys that work on all the intrinsics of InnoDB and all the new features and functions and changes that are going on inside InnoDB are the same guys that write enterprise backup. So they have a very intimate understanding of the InnoDB and can put it into the backup utility. So having easy visibility and notification of any issues with backups is what Enterprise Monitor brings you. So it monitors your backups and lets you know when there are any issues, when they ran, or if they haven't run within a predefined time, if they ran successfully, if they didn't run successfully. So it gives you great insight and lets you rest and feel safe and secure that your backups have run. So what happens is with Enterprise Backup is we create tables inside MySQL that contain the history of all your backups and how successful they were, and Enterprise Monitor checks those. And this is great because MySQLDump and other utilities don't do that either. So it's a tight integration between our different tools. With MySQL Workbench, you can schedule the backups exactly how you need them. You can run restores from MySQL Workbench, and then with MySQL Enterprise Monitor, you can have nice visual monitoring and comfort of knowing that the backups have run. Okay, I'll keep going. So JSON support. This is just a high level, and it's a exciting announcement that we had. So we've been rolling it out piece by piece as they're coming out. The first things that we did in MySQL 5.7 was we created a native binary JSON data type. So rather than storing data as text, as people would usually do, they just create a text or a blob and push data inside it. We have a binary JSON data type that parses your data as it's being stored, validates that it's proper JSON data, and then understands the actual contents of the JSON documents. As you start playing with this, if you want to work with these new features, and this is a good point which I didn't bring up. So this is MySQL JSON is in our both versions of MySQL. So we have our Community Edition and our Enterprise Edition, our commercial binaries. They're based off of the same source tree, and the Enterprise Edition is compiled with a commercial license, and then we provide those features I discussed earlier as plugins. All of our document store functionality is pushed out in MySQL in Community Edition, so you can download and start using it right now. the MySQL client that we're used to, so people are used to running MySQL and call that the shell, that wasn't a good enough fit for JSON. So what we did is we created a new interactive shell called the MySQL shell. And this has 3 basic formats. It runs as, you can run in JavaScript, Python, or SQL modes, and it supports both document and relational models, and it'll spit out data as traditional tables, or it'll spit out in JSON, and I'll show you an example later, or tab separated. The next step that was create functions for manipulating and managing your JSON data. So we created a whole slew of functions internal to MySQL for this. All this is released now. We updated our connectors. So we created a NoSQL CRUD API for them. So CRUD is create, read, update, delete. We created this on our Java connector. We have a Node connector, our .NET, our C++, PHP, and Python all now support this CRUD API. And what's cool about it is it supports both document and relational, so you have the control over both of them. And I'll show some of this, and then if you are more interested in this, we can do I believe there's plans for a deeper dive webinar on just JSON. Then what we did is we have a different server plugin. So where people are used to running MySQL against the 3306 default, now we're currently using, for our JSON connection, we're using 33060. As with other MySQL ports, it's configurable, so that's just a default. Like I said, this is a high-level overview, so I'm going to start with just a couple use cases and then just kind of give you what's your appetite and give you a feel for it. So this is where we're looking at extracting JSON from a relational database. So relational in, relational or document out. This is what people have been used to for years if they've been using MySQL for JSON data or XML data. And what it is MySQL is still storing data in rows and columns. But what we do now is we provide you with the manipulation tools to either extract the data and present it as JSON, or take JSON data and store it into relational. So updates are still going through, updates and inserts through tables and columns, but now you can present the data as JSON objects. It's not too exciting, but what happens is there's so much MySQL usage out there that people can always just say, hey, that's cool, new thing, I'm going to change all of my architecture. And do is say, hey, I've been needing to provide some JSON. I have a customer that wants to provide microservices, so they're looking at this as a way to take some of their older relational data that they have and not have to change the schema, but just present it as JSON. So it's a way to kind of go with older data that's already been there. And a newer and more exciting part is document in and relational or document out. So this is where we have a single MySQL table and it just has a single JSON data column. What's cool about this, I'll show you, is we can create virtual columns and primary keys on those and indexes and so forth. But our reads and writes are directly just to that JSON column. Here I show it as document in and relational out. So here I have a table that's called country info, and basically it just shows one field doc type JSON, and that's it. When I select from there, just limit one, I'm doing it through, this is just through the regular MySQL client, not the new MySQL shell. I do a select and it just shows me, it spits out the data as a document. Now if I do document in and relational out, or sorry, document out, then we can see the table again. It's just my country info. And I made a typo in my command here when I copied it, but this is the output from the new MySQL shell. So I'm running in Python mode, and I just use a find with a limit of 1, and that's our document API, the CRUD API doing the lookup, the read, and now it returns the data to me in just a JSON document. So that's the same way my application can access the data as well. And just to kind of compare native performance of the JSON data compared to text, people have been doing JSON documents in text often, for the past years now. And what they do is, I have 200,000 documents in here. If I'm searching for a unique feature, the query on the right runs it through a text field where I got to parse all of the text. And you can see it took 12 seconds through the 200,000 documents. When I just switch that text field and store the data as JSON, as a JSON binary type, it drops down to 1.25 seconds. So it's a tenfold savings storing data as JSON over text. The cool feature that we created in 5.7 is we can do generated columns, and generated columns support indexes. So with this, we're allowed to just add a column. So I did alter table, features, add column, var chart, just the type. Since it's a metadata change, I'm not storing any data. It's incredibly fast. And then I can add an index on that type, on feature type, on that new column. So basically, I'm creating an index, and in the index, I'm storing the data, and I'm pulling the data from the JSON field of type inside my JSON document. Then when I do a query, you can see I went from 1.25 seconds down to 0.06 seconds now, because it's using the index to find the data. So like I said, this is a high-level overview of just some of the performance improvements that you get with the native JSON binary type. Going from text down to index, we get magnitudes of increase in performance. The goal of the JSON data type is for read performance. Write will still we're parsing the data and making sure it's proper as we're putting in there, validating it. So write isn't as high performant as reads are. But what I'm also seeing a lot of is people are doing hybrid relational. So they have relational document in and relational document out. This makes sense to a lot of existing architectures and applications, where your database is primarily relational, but there's parts of unstructured data that you've been trying to cram into that relational model but just has not been working. So in that situation, you can create a column just on JSON and push that unstructured data inside there, and then your queries can pull from either of them. And the example I show here, it's a pretty simple example, but I have a table where I'm keeping track of all the PC components in my inventory, and then basic stuff like ID, description, vendor, serial number, those are all consistent across all of them, but attributes change on all of them. So some may have SSDs, some may have different CPU core counts, some may have different video cards, and so forth. So what I do is I store all those attributes in unstructured data in JSON. So I have the best of both worlds. And that's basically what we're trying to get at is most of the customers I go out and see, they have a little bit of every type of database out there. So it becomes expensive to try to manage all these different types of data stores. And what we're trying to do is provide you with a one-stop shop for your relational and document stores. So all the MySQL DBAs are familiar with MySQL, used to it, have tools built in place for it. They can just now add this document storage ability on top of it and not have to jeopardize all the tools and all the investment that they made in time. I have a list. So if you look at on the control panel on the right side, there should be a section saying handouts. And the handouts is a PDF version of this presentation. So at the end of it, I have all these great resources. And what I basically covered just briefly was MySQL as a document database. We call this our XDev API and X plugin. This is how you can do talk directly with the CRUD API. So on these links will take you to exactly where you can dive into deeper, use it, test it, walk through examples, use the world X instead of world to see how the different tutorials work and so forth. So it's a great utility. Please download the handout, and then I'm going to hand this on back to XTIVIA.
Dale, thanks so much. That's so much information. Fantastic help. And we have Lisa and Dale here for questions. We had a few questions come in, and so we want to kind of take those questions to you guys and get some feedback. The first one for you two is what are typical retention times, and are there minimums for certain compliance requirements regarding backups?
Yes. So I don't know if I've ever seen any typical retention times. And actually, that's a really good question, because a while back I read through some of the specs for PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance, but I don't remember the times that you need to keep that. I know when people are using, what I usually see is, 1 year's worth of data is what a lot of people try to maintain, but it gets to how much data can they store in offsite. So if they're doing constant incremental backups, it becomes I have a customer that has terabytes of their database, so they're running into multi-terabytes over time, so they've cut their retention time down to just I think a quarter. They're keeping it. But that's assuming that they have a database with archival data in it. So I don't know if Lisa has anything to add. Or...
I know that Lisa is not able to access the sound. Okay. I don't know what the glitch is, but we had trouble with that this morning. And I know Luke also was asking a question. Let's see if that comes through.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions pop up in my side.
Yeah, the great thing about technologies, there's always a little unknown there.
Exactly.
Okay, is there a rule of thumb regarding the speed of enterprise backup versus MySQL dump?
There's a rule of thumb. I had a slide where we compared, I believe it was a 73 gigabyte database, and the backup time so MySQL backup, enterprise backup, runs at the speed of how fast it can copy the data. So in that backup, I think it took 5 minutes to run the backup, and with MySQL dump, it took a couple hours for the backup. But now the key part is how fast the recovery was. So the recovery for MySQL Enterprise Backup was a couple minutes again, because what happens is you just stop the server and then restore it. But then the recovery time for MySQL dump for 73 gigabytes was upwards of, I think, 17 hours. So what I'm going to do now is all of the data that we have, we're open about our benchmarks. So I'm going to grab it off of our website and post a link. I don't know if it'll come through to everybody, but I'll post a link.
If you post it in the chat and choose the entire audience, then it'll come through.
Yeah, it's only providing me with organizers or organizer and panelists. So what I'll do is I'll send it to the organizer to you, and then you can post it to everybody.
Okay.
This is 73. Yeah, so this is a 73 gigabyte database that we ran the tests on, and we saw 49x performance improvements on backups and an 80x on restores. And I've run this at customers and have had similar responses. And what's nice about our enterprise backup is it'll parallelize the backups, and there's you can run a backup just to copy the data off the server, and then run the validation, run the encryption, run everything else on a different server if you want. So it gives you better control over where the CPU usage is going and where what's being used.
Thanks, Dale. There's one more question. There's one more question that came through from Brian. He asked, with enterprise backup, is there an option to automatically delete incremental backups beyond a designated age?
Yeah, I don't think that's a great question, because I don't think there's an automatic option. I haven't seen that, but what we do is we just let you have a script at the end of it, and then what happens is enterprise backup is running. It looks at when the last backups occurred, and it keeps track of all that information. So you can just tell it, that date plus, 10 or plus 14. It'll start deleting all those incremental backups. But yeah, no, it's not. That part is not automated, but it's open for you to be able to add that automation.
Awesome. And if you, Brian, if you need more info about that, this last slide does give email addresses for Dale and Lisa. and you can certainly, you or any of the other attendees, you guys feel free to send specific questions, or if you have a business development question, you can send that to info@xtivia.com or to Paul, our representative for virtual database help. Lastly, I want to remind you guys that we have a handout on here, and if you look in your control panel, it's just a PDF download, and it's the slides from today, so it'll include those links and that contact information. We really appreciate Dale and the time you took with us today. Dale, thank you so much for presenting.
It's my pleasure.
And
I hope it was
for
good.
you attendees, we appreciate that you chose to spend some of your day with us. We know that life is busy and you've got lots of challenges that you're addressing at work. We hope that we can help you with those in a future time. And again, feel free to reach out to either Dale, Lisa, or Paul if you have real specific questions that we can help you with. Thanks again for coming today.
Thank you.